Greetings, history warriors, and welcome back to Hidden History. Today we will take you on a fascinating journey through time. We will embark on an odyssey that will take us to an era of courage, tragedy, and global transformation. Prepare to be immersed in a time that shaped the destinies of nations, defined leaders, and left an indelible mark on human history. Join me as we explore the events that shaped the modern world and unravel the mysteries of one of the most monumental conflicts ever fought. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to help us continue to grow and keep you informed of our updates. Let's get started. On September 1, 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, marking the true beginning of World War II. The Second World War is the most devastating event mankind has ever known, but to understand how it got to this point, we need to go back a few years, at least to the end of the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles had ended the Great War, and Germany, already devastated by the loss of territory and facing disproportionate reparations from the victors, needed a leader to guide them as a nation and rekindle memories of better times. Enter someone like Hitler, a frustrated painter who managed to channel the anger and aspirations of an entire country. If there is anything positive to be said about a villain like Hitler, it is that he was a powerful orator and a master of propaganda. He spoke to the Germans about the superiority of their race and the path the nation should take to improve it. Through persuasive speeches, Hitler emerged as the leader of the German Workers' Party and transformed it into the National Socialist German Workers' Party with nationalist, supremacist, racist, and strongly anti-Semitic and anti-Marxist ideologies. In 1923, Hitler ended up in prison after a failed coup. After his imprisonment, Hitler returned to politics and eventually won a majority in the 1932 elections to become Chancellor of Germany. The following year, in the midst of a worldwide economic crisis, the Third Reich was born. Under the guise of legality, Hitler quickly established a totalitarian regime by dismantling the democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic through an enabling act. He arrested members of the German Communist Party and imprisoned them in concentration camps. Nazi persecution of Jews became an active policy, and Hitler ignored Germany's obligations under the Treaty of Versailles, creating a formidable military state with only timid protests from France and England. In 1938, he began to implement his policy of territorial expansion by incorporating Austria into his Reich. That same year, Hitler threatened to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland, a border region of Czechoslovakia with an ethnic German majority, was ceded to Germany. To resolve the issue, Germans, French, British, and Italians met in Munich for negotiations. British Prime Minister Chamberlain, in an act of cowardice, surrendered to avoid bloodshed. The following year, however, Hitler broke his promise and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Churchill sharply criticized Chamberlain, saying, "We have chosen dishonor over war, we shall have dishonor in war." Hitler's ambitions included the creation of a vast empire through the annexation of Poland. Poland had been created by the Treaty of Versailles, and its territories had previously belonged to Germany, Austria, and Russia. The Poles were given a strip of land to give the country access to the Baltic Sea through the Gdansk corridor. On August 2, 1939, the communist Stalin and the anti-communist Hitler, two irreconcilable enemies, surprised the world with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, a German-Soviet non-aggression pact in which these enemies pledged not to attack each other. 9 days after the pact, Hitler invaded western Poland, and 3 weeks later the Soviets invaded the eastern part. The invasion of Poland prompted England and France to finally declare war on Germany. Germany paused to regroup its forces, while the British and French remained on the defensive. Journalists called this period the Phony War. The British sent troops to France to stop the German advance. British troops, along with French and English troops, remained behind the Maginot Line, a defensive line built after World War I that the French believed to be impregnable. During this period of calm, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, suffering countless casualties and ultimately failing to achieve their main goal of conquering Finland. They only managed to capture some border areas. Hitler, seeing the Red Army as weak and taking advantage of the passivity of many European leaders, made constant moves. He occupied Denmark and Norway, finally ending the Phony War in May 1940. Hitler simultaneously attacked Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, using the same strategy as in Poland. German tanks penetrated the Ardennes forest, previously thought impenetrable to a modern mechanized army, and surrounded the Allied forces. The battle for France seemed lost. In late May, a dramatic evacuation of Allied troops took place at Dunkirk. Germany could have dealt the final blow to the Allies, but some sort of miracle must have occurred, for Hitler allowed more than 300,000 soldiers to escape. The reason remains unknown, giving rise to numerous theories. The Battle of France didn't last much longer. On June 22, Hitler met with several high-ranking French officials who asked for an armistice. Hitler chose the same place and the same train carriage where the armistice with Germany was signed in World War I. This time the tables were turned, with Germany occupying the seat of the victorious side, ending the war in France. France was divided into two parts, an occupied part, including Paris, and an unoccupied part controlled by a collaborationist government. Headquartered in Vichy and led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, it became known as Vichy France. Charles de Gaulle immediately opposed the Vichy government and proclaimed Free France, calling himself the French Resistance. Italy and Germany, the two fascist powers, had been united since 1936 in a coalition that Mussolini called the Rome-Berlin Axis. Mussolini, the leader of the Italian Fascist Party, observed the ease with which Hitler conquered countries and felt that he had chosen the winning side. He joined the Germans in declaring war on France and England. Mussolini sought to expand his holdings, as Italy, like Germany, had been late to the colonial game. His plans included the conquest of Greece and Egypt. However, Hitler had to intervene to help the Italians, who proved to be more of a burden than a help in the war. The Italians fought the Greeks, but reinforcements arrived. Finally, the Germans invaded Greece through Bulgaria. Mussolini then attacked British bases in Egypt from Libya with the goal of taking the Suez Canal, the gateway to the British colonial empire. But what had happened in Europe after the defeat of France, and what about the British? Churchill, the new prime minister after Chamberlain's resignation, refused to sign an armistice with Germany, prompting Hitler to go all out. However, conquering England wouldn't be so easy due to its insular nature. The British heroically defended their island in the Battle of Britain, which was largely an air battle. Churchill delivered another of his memorable quotes, "Never in the field of human conflict did so many owe so much to so few." For over a year, England fought the war alone. The Nazis bombed England's major cities for months, and although Hitler believed he had the situation under control and saw himself as the clear victor, the English resisted and turned the tide by the end of the year. Adolf Hitler met with General Franco in Hendaye, a French town on the border with Spain. Hitler wanted Spain to join the war on the side of the Axis powers, but they could not come to an agreement. Franco was willing, but Spain was going through a massive crisis after the Spanish Civil War. Hitler had succeeded in bringing Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria into the Axis, leaving Yugoslavia as the only missing link. A change of government in Yugoslavia led to its invasion in April 1941. Hitler dreamed of a German Reich stretching from the Rhine to the Volga. It was then that he decided to expand his borders and launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the primary motivation being Russian oil. Stalin, Hitler's ally, was somewhat taken aback as he did not expect Hitler to break their alliance so soon. The invasion was delayed by the conquest of Greece and Yugoslavia. Finally, in June 1941, the Germans mobilized between 3 and 4 million soldiers for Operation Barbarossa. At first, the Germans easily won campaigns and gained territory. Within a month, Belarus and the Baltic republics, previously occupied by the USSR, were in German hands. Hitler estimated that a few months of campaigning would be enough to capture Moscow, but the harsh winter arrived and Hitler's armies were stopped at the gates, a fate reminiscent of Napoleon's. The Rome-Berlin Axis had expanded in 1939 with the addition of Japan. Japan, the most advanced country in the East, wanted to liberate its neighbors, especially the European East Asian colonies. In 1931 they began invading China, which continued in 1937 when Germany occupied France. Japan took control of French Indochina, leading to a trade blockade and oil embargo imposed by the US government under President Roosevelt. Japan's only options were to withdraw or go to war. The Japanese surprised the US by attacking the American base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. In December 1941, the sleeping giant awoke, and Roosevelt delivered his famous infamy speech, declaring a state of war between the US and the Japanese Empire. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invaded Hong Kong and, within months, seized Singapore, Burma, Thailand, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines. It was lightning war, Japanese style. The rising sun flag flew over the Pacific, and Hitler declared war on the US, sealing his ultimate fate. Defeat was only a matter of time. A naval battle began to unfold in the Pacific, while in the Atlantic, the battle had been going on since the beginning of the war. In this scenario, the Germans sank a significant number of Allied ships, mostly supply ships. The role of Allied intelligence was crucial in stemming the tide, particularly in deciphering the Enigma machine used by the Nazis. Some experts argue that this shortened the war by 2 years. In the Pacific, the Americans avenged Pearl Harbor in 1942, and 6 months later, at the Battle of Midway, the Japanese suffered a major setback, losing 4 aircraft carriers. In Europe, the tide began to turn. Churchill authorized massive bombing of the German civilian population. In North Africa, German troops under Rommel and Italian forces won some campaigns, but were defeated at El Alamein, marking a turning point. The Germans failed to reach the Suez Canal, and the plan to seize the oil reserves of the Middle East faded. They also wanted to conquer the oil fields of the Caucasus. It was then that Hitler decided to divide his forces and head for Stalingrad to deal a moral blow to Stalin, as the city bore his name. A miscalculation on Hitler's part, as although the Germans conquered much of the Caucasus, their troops ended up retreating because their focus was on Stalingrad. In early 1943, the Germans surrendered after the protracted Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest in human history. The severe defeat of Nazi Germany and its allies in this city marked a true turning point and was decisive in the final outcome of the war. From that point on, the Germans continued to cede ground to the Russians. In July of that year, the Germans failed to stop the Red Army at the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. That same month, the Allies bombed Rome, causing considerable demoralization among the Italians. They were convinced that the Allies would never bomb the Holy City, and they knew they were losing the war. Eventually, they disavowed their former allies, and shortly thereafter, Mussolini was arrested. This was a major blow to the Germans, as the Italians had betrayed them. On June 4, 1944, the Allies reached Rome and liberated it. On June 6, a massive contingent of Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. The Germans, already retreating from the east, began to retreat from the west. As the Allies crossed the German border, the Germans launched a desperate offensive in the Ardennes, but to no avail. In the Pacific, Japanese forces dwindled, and the actions of the kamikazes only delayed the American offensive. In January 1945, the Red Army reached the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland and liberated thousands of prisoners. The public began to learn about the horrors of the Jewish Holocaust and its true scope. More than 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazi regime. In February, the Allies carried out the bombing of Dresden, one of the largest civilian bombings of the war, destroying nearly the entire city. In April, the Russians reached Berlin, winning the last European battle. In the same month, Mussolini was executed and Hitler committed suicide. Finally, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, ending World War II in Europe. However, the war continued in some areas of Asia, and it took 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August to force the surrender of Emperor Hirohito's implacable army. And so World War II ended, one of the most horrific events in our history, and one that we hope will never be repeated. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications to help us continue to grow. Remember, the past is the compass that guides our present and points the way to the future. Until next time.